Hello, and welcome to the Health Equity Lecture Series, presented by the FDA Office of Minority Health and Health Equity. This month, as part of our observance and celebration of National Native American Heritage Month, we bring you a conversation with Dr. Casey Dorr. I'm your host, Dr. Cheryl Anne Boyce, the Associate Commissioner for Minority Health and Director of the FDA Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, where we have a dedicated mission to promote and protect the health of diverse populations through research and communication of science that addresses health disparities and advances health equity. And I'm glad to welcome Dr. Casey Dorr to the webinar. Dr. Casey Dorr is an investigator in the Nephrology Department at Hennepin Healthcare Research Institute in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He holds faculty appointments at the University of Minnesota's Department of Medicine and the College of Pharmacy. He is also co-director of summer research programs at the University of Minnesota Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. His research focuses on addressing health disparities and improving outcomes in kidney patients using tools of molecular genetics and pharmacogenomics. Dr. Dorr is a first-generation descendant of the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe and was raised in Bemidji, Minnesota. Let's welcome Dr. Dorr. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Boyce.
So to kick us off, I think our viewers would be interested in learning how you got your start in research. Can you tell us a bit about your personal journey and career trajectory?
Yes, so my career in research really started when I was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota Duluth, where I was introduced to a few of my research programs targeted at training undergraduates. The first was a minority undergraduate research program I did at the University of Minnesota. It was a summer research program. I got to work in a lab. I was studying wild rice and studying plant biology. After that, I went back to the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I got into the Minority Access to Research Careers, or the MARC program, which is an NIH program targeted at training underserved students in research. So I was in that program for a couple of years where I continued to learn research skills. And this really started to build my background in research. And that led to another research program through the University of California, San Diego, which was the Minority International Research Training Program I got into. All these are NIH programs. In that Minority International Research Training Program, I got to work in Italy for a semester. I was working in a government lab, learning about plant genetics. But then when I got my PhD at the University of Minnesota, I switched my focus to health science. For various reasons, I wanted to be a health science researcher. So that's really how I got my start, I guess. And I've continued to be a scientist since.
That's a great journey. Now, I know you study pharmacogenomics, and that sounds like an interesting research focus, but I imagine it's unfamiliar to a lot of people. Can you please define pharmacogenomics and explain how it might impact people?
Yeah, pharmacogenomics is really how your genetics affect your drug response. In our case, we study drug metabolism, so how fast a drug is metabolized by the body. So some people genetically are predisposed to metabolize a drug really fast. So if you metabolize a drug fast, that means you need a higher dose because your body is going to get rid of it faster. If you metabolize a drug slow, the drug can accumulate in your body, so you take a lower dose. So that's one form of pharmacogenomics. Another is how you respond to the drug. So some cancers may be resistant to a drug, so you may find the genetics of that cancer to find the appropriate drug to target that cancer. And those are it also is similar with virology and HIV, trying to get the right drug that can kill a resistant virus.
Interesting. So, how do you approach communicating your research to different groups of people?
Well, you need to, one is to get to know the audience or know who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to more lay audience, then you want to keep it more simple. You don't need as many details. If you're speaking to, say, a conference, I go to the American Transplant Congress every year, they're much more interested in the details and they don't want to know the more broad stuff. They want to know the hard science we're finding. Um, and we try to train our students to just keep high level explanations, especially for like lay public or family members that may not be scientifically trained.
So, in your work, you focus on pharmacogenomic kidney research. Can you give us an overview of what that research entails? And could you highlight why it's important for health equity?
Yeah, so we've studied a group of kidney transplant patients, roughly 3,000 patients since 2005. And we found in these transplant patients that minority populations have really considerably worse outcomes. For instance, African American patients may lose their kidney after about 5.5 years, where a non-African American patient they lose their kidney in about 11 years. So one thing we noticed is a lot of our African American patients metabolize drugs really fast, and they may not be getting the right dose of these drugs to keep that kidney functioning. So if we can optimize the right drug doses for patients, we can hopefully make their kidney transplants last longer. And also maybe we can work on preventing them from losing their kidney in the first place so you don't need a transplant.
Thank you. At the FDA and throughout the nation, we are celebrating National Native American Heritage Month this November. Can you tell us about some of your research with Indigenous communities and how to create a research environment that is inclusive of Indigenous values and priorities?
Yeah, so I was trained by a lot of Native American scientists, particularly one of my mentors, Ben Clark and Rick Smith, Ojibwe from up around the Duluth, Minnesota area. And they trained me to become a scientist, to become a leader in our field. And one of the things that I believe in is that we have to give back to our community, and that we train the future generations of Native scientists and other minority populations. So it's been important to me to reach out and do outreach and training to our Indigenous people. I do a lot through the American Indian Science and Engineering Society and the Society for Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science to try to build a community throughout the country of like-minded people so that we can help train the future generations. Um, and so this also leads to the research. So if we can train Native people to do research on Native people, it's much more accepted by the community than having what may be called like helicopter research, where people come in, do research on Native communities, and then leave. And the community never hears back from them, or never gets the results, or never sees any outcomes that benefit the community. So it's very important that we have lifelong dedications with our researchers and our communities. And I think that's true not just in Indigenous populations, but in other populations as well.
So, thinking in more general terms, beyond
Mhm.
your research, could you discuss what approaches you think are working that help to reduce health disparities among Native American and other racial and ethnic minority populations? And what steps do you think will help accelerate awareness and adoption of those approaches?
That's a good question. So I think there's a lot of social factors that go beyond just the research. So, and this is the Food and Drug Administration, not only getting people the right drugs, but getting the right food to the communities. Native people have had major changes in lifestyle and environment and access to healthy foods throughout the generations. I think to really help Native people, we need to, one, help people become more self-efficient, self-dependent, so that they're able to earn more money, get better paying jobs, give back to the community through service. Um, and I think there's a lot to do with just access to healthcare, access to services. A lot of Native people live on reservations. There may not be a hospital even on the reservation or anywhere close to where they live. So a lot of this access and just the I guess access to healthcare and services and the ability to move up in society so you have more money. Like one thing we found in our kidney patients is you can control, and this is through the United States Renal Data System, you can control diabetes and hypertension, and still having more money is more important in many of your kidney outcomes than controlling those factors. Just because you have more access to healthcare, better healthy foods, education, and so it goes beyond just the medicine, but in the holistic being of wellness for people.
I want to ask you, how has pharmacogenomics and your research changed over the course of your career? Are there any significant differences you see in research today?
Yeah, so when I first started research well, in high school, I guess the Human Genome Project was just starting. We didn't really have all the DNA, so there weren't really a lot of actionable pharmacogenetic um, approaches available at the time because we just didn't have all the sequencing. We didn't know all these variants and how they affect drug metabolism. So one is the onset of pharmacogenomics has just that appeared during my lifetime. Um, so the idea of personalized medicine is itself novel. Another thing is how we can identify new biomarkers or new drug targets. There's a lot of new technologies. My lab studies mechanisms of kidney diseases. So we use what's called spatial omics, where we can look inside of the kidney tissue. We can see what genes and what cells are over here versus here, such as the glomerulus or the tubules. And we can see what genes are expressed. And we can use this to identify biomarkers. So this could also develop new drug targets in the future. And then we could also use pharmacogenomics to get the right dose for that target. Um, And so these technologies really didn't exist 10, 20 years ago, but they are now. They're in use, they're in development, and pharmacogenomics is rapidly developing as we know more about diversity in genomics from people to people, drug responses. So we're really learning a lot now on how to do that.
How do you think that research will contribute to a more equitable future?
Well, one is to get people the right drugs. So in our case with transplant patients, we know a lot of African American patients are not getting the right drug doses, which may be leading to these poor outcomes. So, one is to get people the right doses of the right drugs, especially in transplant patients where the medications are so important, um, but also in the prevention of diseases too, helping find the right drugs early and then getting access to the drugs. Some patients just don't have access to medications in the first place, or they don't go to the doctor. So there's a lot of groundwork upstream that needs to be done as well before the pharmacogenomics even gets to come into play. Um, yeah, so I think getting the right doses of drugs to people is really where pharmacogenomics comes in.
I admire your commitment to research, but
Thanks.
also to training the next generation of researchers. Why is it
Yeah.
important to have researchers from a variety of backgrounds? How have you seen that in your research?
So this really drives innovation. If we have a diverse population of scientists in a room, if everyone's from the same background, went to the same schools, it's hard to get some innovative thoughts. But when we get people from maybe all over the world, different backgrounds throughout the country, we have different value systems, different ideas of innovation. We've learned through different methods. We had different elders that trained us, different teachers that we've learned throughout our lives. And we get a different way of doing things from where people come from. And I highly value that diversity. So I remember like being in math class as a kid, there'd be three, four different ways to get the same answer. And if you just think there's one way, it's not always right. I mean, someone else has a different way to get to the same answer is equally valid. So a lot of this innovation in science can be driven through diversity of thought, diversity of people, and I really value that.
You make a good point. Now, I know you lead a summer research program
Yeah.
at the University of Minnesota that focuses on training undergraduates and doctoral students from Native American communities and other underrepresented communities. Could you tell us about that work and how you hope to impact future generations of researchers?
Yeah, this is really a passion of mine because I've been able to make a living as a scientist because of training programs. And many of these training programs have been NIH diversity training programs. And that I've been able to learn as a student through these programs. It really influenced me to how can I give back now that I'm at this faculty level in my life. And so 3 years ago, I guess, I've done this for 3 summers now. I was asked by the University of Minnesota's Clinical and Translational Science Institute to co-direct these summer programs, which I co-direct with the vice dean of the medical school, Ana Nunez. And we lead these programs, which we focus on, although anyone's really eligible for a lot of people are eligible for the program. We do have a very diverse cohort. And we're trying to train the students so that they get skills that are not necessarily taught in, say, the chemistry classroom, how to network, how to present your research, how to make posters, how to simplify your research to the lay audience so you can maybe explain it in a few sentences instead of a long paragraph, and how to be more resilient. So, as scientists, we fail all the time. Like any paper I've published probably got rejected before it was published. Any grant I've got had been maybe not discussed or maybe rejected the first try. And you get it on the second or third try. And this is part of our learning process. So if something doesn't go our way, we learn from it. And this is what we're trying to instill in these students, that you can be a scientist. If you want to be a scientist, you can be a clinician, you can be whatever you really want. But you have to learn from your mistakes, your failures, and get up and try again. And so we really try to get these students to come in, be able to feel authentically themselves. We have a nurturing environment where we set our norms right away, respect each other. We are all very different, and then try to learn together. And so that's important to me. And that's something that I guess I value a lot.
Sounds like a great program. We like to ask our guests to share career or personal advice for young professionals in health equity. I imagine you give plenty of advice as part of your summer research program. So, what advice do
The
you have for researchers and other young professionals starting their careers in health equity?
the first thing is get a goal or or have a dream, something that you want to work towards. And this could be, there's short-term goals and there's long-term goals. So have like your eye on some prize down the road. Maybe it's a PhD, maybe it's a medical doctorate. Maybe you want to be some job you want in the future. Um, have that as a goal and then start picking away at what you can do now. What's my next step? What can I do today? How can I get towards that goal and make progress every day towards that dream? Um, that's that's really what's driven me. It's like when I get up in the day, what can I do today that's going to get me towards wherever I want to be? Um, and right now, I'm kind of where I want to be. I'm doing science, leading research projects. I'm advocating for our Indigenous people and helping other minority populations the best I can. And so, if I can keep this going, that's important. And that's that. What can I do today to get me to that distant dream?
Thank you so much. This has been a very informative conversation. We're going to take a few questions from our audience. Since we were just speaking about career advice, can you share more information on how people can apply to your summer research program?
Yeah. So our program, we're finishing up the request for applications now. We put that out the first week of December or the second week of December, and you could go to the University of Minnesota's Clinical and Translational Science Institute's webpage, ctsi at umn.edu or something like that. And there's a webpage for our Advanced Pathways to Research program and our Pathways to Research program. As well as the CTSI offers training programs for every level of academics. So I start at the undergrads and the graduate students, but our CTSI also goes all the way up to senior faculty level. And we have leadership training all along that for postdocs, grad students, junior faculty, senior faculty. So there's a variety of other programs there too.
That sounds like a
And
great resource.
yeah,
For other researchers who conduct clinical trials that may include members of tribal communities, what would you say are the most important things to know about talking to a patient or about their participation?
I I would say to recognize where they're coming from and to listen to what the patient's needs are. If they don't want to join the study, that's their right. Don't like force them to join a study. Maybe they don't like something in the consent process, and make sure that the patients know what they're consenting to. So I'm a genetic researcher, but I only want to study people who consent to the research. I don't think it's ethically correct to try to force someone to do some study they don't want to do. So be open to the patient's needs, what they want. And when it comes to tribal communities, it's really a lifelong investment, at least for me. This isn't something you just go do for a 5-year project or something. It's an investment for my whole life. Um, and I think that's important to Indigenous peoples that this person's invested in our community forever, um, and not just for some research project. It's about the betterment of the community and not the researcher. And to try to do, when possible, do the research projects the community needs, not what the researcher wants to do. Like there's things I may want to do, but it may not have any benefit at times. So we got to readjust as researchers to what's actually significant to helping the communities.
What are the most common things you see in your work? And how can healthcare providers better care for people in American Indian and Alaska Native communities who are living with kidney disease?
Well, the first thing is um, try not to lose that kidney. So there's a lot of lifestyle factors that people can make to save the kidneys they have, because if you lose your kidney, there's three options. You get dialysis, you have to get a transplant, or you die. And so the problem with Native communities, a lot of people end up on dialysis and never get the transplant for various reasons. Maybe they don't become eligible. Maybe there's not a kidney that they match with, or just kidney available. Or in some cases, they live too far from the transplant center or they can't get to the transplant in time to get the kidney. So the first thing would be do everything you can not to reach end stage kidney disease. So if say your creatinine blood work comes back and they say something's wrong with your kidney, take that serious and listen to your doctors and nutritionists. And it may take some therapists too to change there's a lot of factors that can happen that lead to kidney loss. The main ones are diabetes and hypertension, which can be controlled. So the big thing is to really take that serious if you're having some sort of kidney issue. Um, what was the rest of the question?
You answered it all. So, what is something that has surprised you, good or bad, about your research?
Oh, I think just discovering things. Like I remember when I was in graduate school, I was trying to find new HIV drugs. And I just remember that I found one that was actually killing the virus. I was doing some flow cytometry assay, and all of a sudden, like, I actually found a drug that's killing the virus. I got all happy, and it surprised me right there. And there's other times when we're doing research and you get that eureka moment, you actually discover something. Um, like these so we engineer cell lines with these genetic variants so that we can figure out in cell culture how genetics affect drug metabolism, because it's often too hard to enroll a lot of patients to investigate some of these genetic variants. So when we're able to confirm this, what we see in patients and cell culture, that's always a good feeling. It's like, hey, we're replicating what's happening in patients and cell culture. Maybe we have new models to do this, to study how drugs interact, how genetics affect drug metabolism, and we can do that now in my lab. Um, so that's something that's really, I guess, kind of been exciting for me is these new models we develop in our lab. And really, what we want to do with that is with these models we have in our lab, we translate this back to the patients. And so that what we'd like to see is where a patient goes in to the doctor, they could get a DNA test, and then it pops up with this score. It says, okay, this patient needs X dose of drug X, or do not mix these drugs for this patient. And so that we can get patients the right doses of the right drugs and the right combinations. Um, and it's particularly important in kidney patients where they take 10 to 15 drugs a day and they interact with each other, especially transplant patients. They're taking all these drugs for kidney disease, for their blood pressure, for diabetes, for cholesterol. Then they got to take all these anti rejection drugs, often steroids. And if they get a viral infection or a fungal infection, they have to take antifungals. And all of a sudden, they're at 15, 20 drugs a day for a while sometimes. And we want to make that as easy as possible. And so those patients get through those periods and can live a good, healthy life. Um, and that we can figure a lot of this out in my lab without having to enroll patients is really gets me excited.
Many of us who may have loved ones who are living with kidney disease,
Yeah.
what advice do you have for them to talk to their friends and family members?
Support them. Just if they need to change their lifestyle, be there for them, help them get the foods they need. They may need lower sodium, lower sugar foods, so help support them and helping them have what they need, getting the right amount of activity, and the mental aspects of making life changes when you find out you have kidney disease. They need family support for that too. So I would say just be there for them and the best you can, and understand that they're going through a lot. Because when you start losing an organ, it's kind of traumatic. It's traumatic. Like, okay, my kidney doesn't work. What do I do? That's the first thing. People just don't really know what to do at first. So just help them the best you can.
I want to thank you, Dr. Dorr, for joining us and this great conversation. Before we close, I want to encourage our viewers to visit the OMHHE website at www.fda.gov/health equity to learn more about our initiatives and resources, and follow us on X at FDA Health Equity. Thank you for tuning into the discussion, and happy National Native American Heritage Month.